If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, take a deep breath and let everything go. Good night, my dear friend. Now we can begin. The first time my phone rang at 2:14 a.m., I thought it was a mistake. A glitch, some kind of late night spam call. But when I looked at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was her number. 6 months had passed since I buried Claire. 6 months of empty nights, cold bed sheets, and a house that had never felt quieter. I'd barely touched my phone after the funeral. I couldn't bear to delete her messages or clear out her voicemails. But I knew one thing for certain: her number had been disconnected. So why was it calling me now? The screen glowed in the dark, illuminating my shaking hands. I stared at it, pulse hammering, throat dry. My mind struggled between two thoughts. This isn't real, and what if it is? I let it ring, then, just as suddenly as it started, the call ended. No voicemail, no message, just silence. I didn't sleep that night, and the next night, when the phone rang at the exact same time, I answered. And I heard her voice. The moment I answered the call, a cold shiver ran down my spine. My fingers felt numb against the phone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Hello. My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. For a second, there was only silence. The kind of deep, unsettling silence that makes you question if you even heard the phone ring in the first place. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I had finally lost my mind. Then I heard it. James. My breath hitched. My stomach twisted into knots. It was her voice, not a robotic imitation, not a distorted echo. It was Claire. The same gentle tone, the same soft way she always said my name, but there was something wrong. Claire. I croaked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Silence again. Then she spoke. James, why won't you let me in? The room around me felt smaller, suffocating. I looked around as if expecting to see her standing in the shadows, watching me. My throat went dry. What do you mean? Static crackled through the phone, like a weak radio signal fighting to stay alive. Then her voice returned, weaker this time. James, I'm outside. A sharp knock echoed through my apartment. I nearly dropped the phone. The sound was too real, too perfectly timed. I turned my head, staring at my front door. My hands trembled. The apartment was dark except for the glow of my phone screen, but I could see the faint outline of my front door from where I sat. Another knock, soft, persistent. James, please. My blood ran cold. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. Claire was dead. I had seen her body in that casket. I had lowered her into the ground with my own hands. So who, or what was knocking at my door? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. I stood up slowly, feeling like my legs might give out beneath me. My phone was still pressed against my ear, but the static had faded. The line was dead. The knocking stopped. I inched closer to the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for the peephole. A deep breath, and then I looked. The hallway was empty. No one was there. Yet, as I stared through the peephole, a chill crept up my spine. The hallway lights flickered. A shadow, something dark and shapeless, shifted near the stairwell. It moved unnaturally, jerky, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. And then, the final horror, the doorknob twisted. Slowly, deliberately, I stumbled back, clutching my chest. My breathing turned shallow. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, like something was watching me from the other side. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The doorknob went still. The hallway light returned to normal. The presence, whatever it was gone. And then my phone rang again. 2:14 a.m. Claire's number. The phone vibrated in my shaking hand, Claire's name glowing on the screen. 2:14 a.m. I couldn't move. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. The door in front of me was still, the hallway beyond it empty, but I knew I wasn't alone. I should have ignored the call. I should have thrown my phone across the room and hidden under my covers like a child afraid of the dark. But I didn't. Instead, my thumb hovered over the screen for only a second before I answered. James. Her voice was weaker this time, distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. Claire, I whispered, stepping away from the door. My legs felt unsteady, like the floor beneath me might crumble at any moment. Silence, a crackle of static. Then, a sound that sent my stomach twisting into knots, ragged breathing. I knew that sound. I had heard it the night she died. Struggling, weak, fading, where are you? I choked out. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, through the crackling static, she whispered something that made my blood run cold. I'm trying to come home. A lump formed in my throat. The words barely made sense, but something about the way she said them, pleading, desperate, made my skin crawl. Asterisk, Claire, you're not. I hesitated, my mouth dry. I couldn't bring myself to say the word, dead. I couldn't say it. More silence. Then, I heard something strange, a sound beneath the static, scraping, like nails dragging against wood. My pulse quickened. It was close. I turned my head toward the closet. The sound was coming from inside. I stared at the door, heart hammering, my breath coming out in short, shallow bursts. The scraping grew louder. Slow, deliberate, like something was trapped inside, trying to claw its way out. James. Her voice was louder now, but it wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from the closet. I took a step back. No, this wasn't happening. The doorknob rattled. I sucked in a sharp breath, pressing my back against the wall. This isn't real. Claire is gone. Then the whisper came again, just on the other side of the door. Let me out. Bang. The door shook violently, like something inside had thrown itself against it. Bang. Again, harder this time. I scrambled toward my bedside table, yanking open the drawer. My hands fumbled for something, anything, until I grabbed the small pocket knife I kept for emergencies. The closet door shuddered, then silence. The air in the room turned thick, heavy. My ears rang from the blood rushing through my head. The phone in my hand crackled. Claire's voice, barely a whisper, came through one last time. James, don't open it. Click. The call ended. The closet door creaked open, and I wasn't alone. The closet door creaked open. A sliver of darkness stretched across the floor, swallowing the dim glow from my bedside lamp. I held my breath, gripping the pocket knife so tightly my knuckles ached. The room was dead silent. My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to move, to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there frozen like a fool. But I couldn't. Because something was inside. I felt it before I saw it. A presence, thick and suffocating, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The air inside the closet seemed too deep, as if the space stretched into something far beyond my bedroom wall. And then, movement, a slow, deliberate shifting in the darkness. Something was stepping forward. I raised my pocket knife, my shaking hand barely keeping it steady. James, Claire's voice, but it wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from inside the closet. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. My body screamed at me to get out, but my legs wouldn't listen. Claire, I choked out. A figure stepped into the light. My stomach twisted into knots. It was her. But it wasn't. Claire stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, wearing the same pale blue nightgown she had died in. Her long brown hair hung loose around her shoulders, damp as if she had just stepped out of a rainstorm. Her skin was too pale, almost gray, and her eyes, I felt sick. They weren't hers. Claire's eyes had been warm, deep brown with tiny flecks of gold that caught the sunlight. But the thing standing in front of me, its eyes were black, empty, like deep wells that went on forever. I'm home, James. Her lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. I took another step back. My head was spinning. This wasn't real. Claire was dead. I buried her, but she was here. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The light in my room flickered. The air grew thick, charged with something unseen, and then she moved. Not like a person, not like Claire. Her head twitched, snapping to the side at an unnatural angle. Her arms hung limp at her sides, but her fingers twitched, curling and uncurling, like she was struggling to remember how they worked. My stomach lurched. She lurched forward, her bare feet barely making a sound against the floor. I backed away too fast, tripping over my bedside table and hitting the ground hard. The phone slipped from my hand, skidding across the floor. Claire, or whatever this thing was, tilted her head, staring at me with those black, bottomless eyes. Then, in a voice too hollow, too wrong, she whispered, "Let me in, James." I scrambled backward, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then the alarm on my phone went off. A high-pitched, shrill sound that cut through the heavy silence like a blade. The thing wearing Claire's face flinched. For the first time, I saw something in her expression, not malice. Not anger, fear. The air around me suddenly felt lighter. The lights flickered again, then steadied. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The closet door stood wide open, revealing only the empty darkness inside. I sat there for a long moment, struggling to catch my breath. My phone continued its alarm, vibrating against the floor. I didn't want to pick it up, because deep down I knew this wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the open closet, expecting Claire to step out again. But she didn't. The room was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was my phone buzzing against the hardwood floor. The alarm had stopped, but I had another notification. New voicemail. My stomach twisted. The last time I checked my voicemail, it was her. I hesitated, staring at the glowing screen in the darkness. My hands were clammy, my pulse unsteady. Then, slowly, I pressed play. The message began with silence. No static, no breathing, just emptiness. Then, James, her voice. I gripped the phone tighter. "Why are you running from me?" My breath caught in my throat. "I just want to come home." A clicking sound crackled through the speakers, like someone tapping their fingernails against the microphone. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "You let me in once, remember?" I nearly dropped the phone. No, that wasn't true. I had never. "I'm waiting, James." The voicemail ended. I sat there, heart pounding, mind racing. What did she mean? I let her in once. My hands trembled as I replayed the message, listening for anything I might have missed. But the words were the same. "You let me in once." I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just overtired, spiraling into paranoia. But then I saw it. A timestamp at the bottom of the voicemail. It didn't say 2:14 a.m. like the others. It said 1 year ago. My blood turned to ice. How was that possible? I had never received a voicemail like this before. Had I? A chill ran down my spine as a horrible thought crept into my mind. What if I had just forgotten? What if I had already let her in once before? And worse, what if she was trying to come back? This wasn't over, not even close. The voicemail wouldn't stop playing in my head. "You let me in once." "I'm waiting, James." And that timestamp 1 year ago. I checked my phone again, scrolling through my voicemail history. But there was nothing, no record of this message ever existing. Had I deleted it? Had I somehow forgotten? I needed answers. I poured myself a stiff drink and sat at my desk, pulling my laptop closer. If this voicemail really existed a year ago, then maybe, just maybe, I had some record of it. I opened my external hard drive. It was something I barely touched, an old backup of my phone and computer files. I wasn't even sure if it had anything useful. But I had to try. I scrolled through the folders looking for anything, any sign that Claire had called me before. And then I found it, a folder labeled "Do Not Open." My stomach twisted. I had no memory of making this. The date said it was created exactly 1 year ago. My hand hovered over the touchpad, my breath shallow. Everything in me screamed, "Don't open it," but I clicked. Inside, there were only two files. A text document and audio recording. I opened the text document first. My own words stared back at me. "James, if you're reading this, it means you forgot again." Forgot what? I kept reading. "Do not listen to the voicemail. Do not answer the phone. Whatever you do, do not let her in." My pulse pounded in my ears. Forgot again. How many times had this happened? I scrolled down further. There were more words, but they were blurred, corrupted, or maybe deleted. Then my eyes landed on the final sentence, written in bold. "If you listen to the audio file, it will all come back to you." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stop, but I had to know. Slowly, I clicked on the audio file. A low hum filled my speakers. Static crackled, then breathing, a soft inhale, a slow exhale, then a voice. "James," my blood ran cold. It was me. "She's coming back." Then silence. My entire body broke into a cold sweat. I ripped off my headphones, my pulse hammering. I had recorded this. I had warned myself. I knew this would happen, and yet I had forgotten. A new realization settled over me, colder than anything before. This wasn't just a voicemail. This wasn't just grief or hallucination. Claire was real, and somehow, some way, I had let her in before, and now she wanted to come back. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. My own voice had warned me, "She's coming back." How many times had I gone through this? How many times had I forgotten? My mind raced. If I had left myself a message, then I must have known what was happening before. But why would I forget? And then I realized something even worse. What else had I forgotten? I grabbed my phone and checked my call logs, scrolling as fast as I could. The calls from Claire's number were there, every night, 2:14 a.m., but there were also outgoing calls. To her number, my breath caught in my throat. I had called her back, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Why? I checked the timestamps. Every outgoing call was made around the same time I had lost consciousness the night before. Had I spoken to her? Had I answered without realizing it? Or worse, had I forgotten the conversations completely? A new wave of fear washed over me. What if I wasn't just forgetting? What if I was being made to forget? I had to know. I clicked on my voice memos app. If I had been smart enough to leave myself a warning in a text file, maybe I had left other recordings. Sure enough, there was one labeled, "If you're seeing this, it's too late." I hesitated, then pressed play. My own voice crackled through the speaker. "James, if you're hearing this, it means she got in again. Again. You need to wake up. You need to remember." I gripped the phone tighter. She's not Claire. She looks like her. She sounds like her, but she's not her. The audio glitched, distorting into a mess of static. I could barely make out my own words. She wears her face, she wears her voice, but it's not her. Then a new voice interrupted the recording. Not mine, not Claire's, but something else. Something wrong. "James, you shouldn't be listening to this." The voice was familiar, but twisted. A sick mockery of Claire's voice. "You let me in once before, and you'll do it again." The recording cut off. The room felt too quiet, the air too still. I slowly turned toward the closet. The door was open. I was sure I had closed it earlier. A faint whisper crawled through the dark. "James, come back to bed." I wasn't alone. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. That voice, it was Claire's, but not Claire's. It was wrong. Too soft. Too sweet. Like someone pretending to be her. The closet door was open. I could see only darkness inside. A shape shifted within. No, 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 no. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I switched to the dialer, my thumb hovering over the emergency number. 911. But then I saw it. A new voicemail, received 2:14 a.m. No, that wasn't possible. It wasn't 2:14 a.m. yet. It was barely past midnight, but the message was there. I swallowed hard and pressed play. A breathy static filled my ear. Then, "James, why are you hiding?" I flinched, dropping the phone onto my desk. The whisper hadn't come from the voicemail. It had come from inside the closet. I ran. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I bolted from the chair, rushing for the bedroom door. But as soon as my fingers wrapped around the doorknob, click, it locked from the outside. Something was in here with me. A slow creak came from the closet. I turned my head just enough to see movement from the corner of my eye. A hand, long fingers curled around the edge of the doorframe, then a foot, a pale, bare foot, stepping out of the dark. Then another, and then a figure emerged, Claire, or something wearing Claire's face. Her head tilted unnaturally, her lips curled in a smile too wide. "James, we've done this before." My breath hitched. My own voice from the recording echoed in my head. "She's not Claire." She took a step forward. I pressed my back against the door, my pulse hammering. "You let me in once." She took another step. "And you'll do it again." Her grin stretched. Her eyes were too dark. Her voice wasn't Claire's anymore. It was something else. "Come back to bed." I reached for the lamp on my desk, anything I could use as a weapon. But as soon as I grabbed it, the lights cut out. The room plunged into pitch blackness, and in the dark I heard it. The sound of bare feet moving toward me, fast, too fast. Darkness swallowed everything. For a split second, there was nothing, no sound. No movement, just a crushing silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Then, the footsteps, fast, rushing toward me. I spun, my hands scrambling for the door handle. It wouldn't budge. Still locked. My breathing was loud in my ears, ragged and uneven. The floorboards groaned beneath shifting weight. She was right there. I swung the lamp blindly in front of me, but it hit nothing. Silence. A whisper of breath tickled my ear. "James, why do you always run?" I threw myself forward. The door finally gave way, bursting open as I tumbled into the hallway. My hands scraped against the floor as I scrambled up, my chest heaving. The hallway was dark. No, not just dark. Wrong, the familiar warm glow of my apartment's nightlight was gone. Everything looked off, distorted. I turned back toward my bedroom. She was standing in the doorway. Claire, or not Claire. Her body wasn't moving. Not the way a person moves. She twitched, jerked, like something learning how to use a body for the first time. Then, in a slow, broken motion, she tilted her head. A sound clicked from her throat, a noise I had never heard a human make. And then she smiled. "You never remembered, James, but I do." Her voice was sweet, playful, too familiar. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering. "What do you mean?" My voice cracked. Her grin stretched wider, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "Come find out." Then she stepped toward me, and everything went black. No sound, no feeling, just nothing. And when I opened my eyes again, I was back in my bed. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen lit up. "Incoming call, Claire 2, 14 a.m. 2, 14 a.m. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. "Incoming call, Claire." I didn't answer, couldn't. My chest was too tight, my breath too shallow. How was I back here? I ran from her. I made it out, didn't I? I slowly turned my head toward the bedroom door. It was closed, the lamp was back in place. Everything looked untouched, like nothing had happened, except for the phone, still ringing. I clenched my jaw and reached for it. The moment my finger hovered over the decline button, the ringing stopped. New voicemail. I swallowed hard. My thumb hesitated before tapping play. A breathy static filled my ear. Then, a whisper, "You're waking up, James." Chills crawled up my spine. The voice wasn't Claire's, not entirely. It was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. I shot up from bed, heart racing. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand and rushed to the door. The knob turned easily. Unlocked, that was wrong. It had been locked from the outside before. I stepped into the hallway. The apartment was silent. Too silent, then, something moved in the corner of my vision. I turned toward the living room. The TV was on. Static, I never left the TV on. A shape flickered in the screen's reflection. I spun around, nothing there. But then I noticed something else, the clock. The red digital numbers glowed in the dark. 2:14 a.m. My stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. I had just woken up to the same time, answered the same call, heard the same message. I was stuck, trapped in the loop. A soft, distorted laugh crackled through the TV speakers. You almost remember now. The same voice from the voicemail. I backed away from the screen, my breath shallow. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I needed to get out. I turned toward the door and froze. Claire was standing there, her body cast in the flickering light of the TV. She was smiling, waiting, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the darkened hallway, were others. Dozens of figures. Silent, motionless, each one with the same face, Claire's face, and in unison they spoke. Time to wake up, James. The lights flickered. The TV screen glitched, and the world around me collapsed. Darkness, nothing. And then I opened my eyes. Back in my bed, 2:14 a.m. The phone started ringing, 2:14 a.m. The phone rang. I didn't reach for it this time. I just sat there, heart pounding, staring at the screen, waiting. I already knew what would happen if I answered. Or if I didn't. Either way, I'd wake up here again, stuck, trapped. The call stopped, a pause, then new voicemail. My stomach twisted. I swallowed hard and pressed play. At first, just static. Then, a sound underneath it. A whisper, faint, like something speaking from far away. But as I listened, the whisper grew louder. No closer, right behind me. I turned, nothing, but I felt them, standing just out of sight. The whispers slithered through the air, overlapping. Multiple voices. I could barely make out the words, "We see you. You don't remember, but we do. You brought us here." My breath caught in my throat. Brought them here? Who were they? I grabbed my phone and tried calling someone, anyone. No service, of course. The apartment was too quiet. I moved to the window and pulled back the curtains. My blood turned to ice. The street below wasn't real. It was wrong. The buildings looked stretched, twisted. Streetlights flickered in unnatural patterns. There were people down there, but they weren't moving, not walking, not breathing, just standing still. Facing my building, facing me, their heads tilted upward, as if they knew I was watching. I took a step back, heart hammering. My breath fogged up the glass, and when it cleared, one of them was standing right outside my window. A woman, Claire. Her face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. She raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. A voice echoed inside my head. "Let us in, James." The lights flickered. The apartment door unlocked. A soft creak as it swung open. And in the darkness of the hallway, they were waiting, the whispering ones. Staring, smiling, moving toward me, and then darkness. Everything vanished, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in bed. 2:14 a.m. The phone started ringing. Again I was shaking. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. Silence, then, breathing, slow. Ragged, right in my ear, and then Claire's voice, "James, why won't you open the door?" I clenched my jaw. "You're not real," I whispered. Static crackled. A second voice joined hers, a man's voice. "She's waiting for you." I nearly dropped the phone. That voice, it was mine. I shot up from the bed, heart hammering. This wasn't a dream. It was a loop. A trap. I turned to the window again. The people outside were closer. Their heads still tilted, still staring, but now some of them were smiling. Twisted, too wide grins. Their mouths weren't just stretching. They were splitting open. My stomach churned. I stepped back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and that's when I saw it. The floor was wrong. The wood wasn't wood anymore. It looked soaked, swollen, like it had been rotting underwater. A wet, gurgling sound came from beneath me. Something moved under the boards. I held my breath, and then it knocked. A heavy, deliberate thump from under the floorboards. I bolted for the door, slammed it shut, locked it, but the knocking continued, not just from the floor now. From the walls, from the ceiling, from the inside of the closet, the whispers returned. "We are here, James. We've always been here." A sharp pain stabbed through my skull. Memories, fragments of something I couldn't grasp, flooded my vision. A dark room, a single light bulb swinging, a table with a body on it, a scalpel in my hand, blood, Claire's voice, "You remember now, don't you?" I screamed, and everything went black. I woke up gasping, back in bed, sweating, trembling. 2:14 a.m. The phone rang. Again! I woke up gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had just surfaced from drowning. My clothes clung to me, damp with cold sweat. The room was dark, but I already knew what time it was. 2:14 a.m. The phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade, shrill and insistent. My entire body tensed, but this time I didn't hesitate. I snatched the phone off the nightstand and pressed it to my ear, bracing for the voice on the other end. For a moment, nothing, just the soft crackle of static, like an old radio struggling to find a signal. And then, "James, why do you keep running from me?" Claire's voice was smooth, familiar, but there was something else beneath it now. A distortion, a second voice layered just below hers. It was deeper, stretched, inhuman. "You don't remember, but you will. It's time, James." I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the shudder rolling through me. "Time for what?" I forced out. The static grew louder, and through it, I heard something whispers. Not just Claire's voice this time, but others. Dozens, hundreds, some male, some female, all speaking at once in a chorus of hushed, unintelligible words. And then, one voice rose above the rest, a man's voice. "Look under the floor, James." The call cut out. The silence that followed was almost worse. My breath came in ragged gasps as I lowered the phone, my mind racing. Under the floor, I didn't want to move. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay in bed, to wait until morning, to pretend none of this was happening. But I already knew there would be no morning, not unless I faced this. Slowly, I turned my head toward the floor. The old wooden planks stretched out before me, dark and worn, nothing unusual about them at first glance. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed it, a seam, a faint outline of something rectangular, right in the center of the room. A hatch. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't remember ever seeing it before, but something about it felt familiar. My fingers trembled as I slid out of bed, stepping cautiously toward the hidden door. The wood felt unnaturally cold beneath my feet. I crouched down and traced the edges with my fingertips, pressing lightly. At first, nothing happened, then suddenly, the boards shifted beneath my touch. A soft click, and the hatch creaked open. A rush of cold, damp air wafted up from the darkness below, carrying the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. Blood. I swallowed hard, peering into the abyss. There was a ladder leading down. The whispers returned, slithering through the air like a distant, beckoning call. "Come home, James." My body locked up. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, to slam the hatch shut and pretend it wasn't there. But a part of me already knew I couldn't, because this wasn't just some nightmare. This was something I had left unfinished. And now it was waiting for me to remember. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the ladder and began to descend. The first step onto the ladder was the hardest. My foot trembled as I lowered myself down, the wooden rungs groaning beneath my weight. The air grew colder the deeper I descended, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic blood. I didn't know how far the drop was, but as I climbed lower, the dim glow from my bedroom faded until I was swallowed by darkness. My breath echoed in the confined space. Then my foot hit solid ground. I exhaled, the sound shaky in the still air. The space beneath the house was a narrow crawl space, low enough that I had to stoop. The dirt floor uneven beneath my bare feet. And then I saw it. In the dim glow of my phone's screen, the earth was disturbed. A patch of loose dirt, uneven and recently disturbed, sat in the center of the crawl space. My stomach twisted. Someone had buried something here. A whisper brushed against my ear. "Dig, James." I flinched, spinning around, but I was alone. The voice wasn't coming from my phone. It was here with me. Swallowing my fear, I dropped to my knees and hesitated for only a second before plunging my hands into the cold dirt. The soil was damp, clinging to my fingers as I dug furiously, my breath quick and shallow. Then my fingers hit something solid. Wood, no, not just wood, a box. A small wooden chest, its surface rough and splintered, buried beneath the house. My heartbeat thundered as I pulled it free, brushing off the clumps of dirt. The lid had a rusted latch, but it wasn't locked. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed cloth, lay a cassette tape. I stared at it, my mind reeling. Of all the things I expected, bones, a diary, some sinister relic from the past. This was different, but somehow it felt just as terrifying. Slowly, I unwrapped the tape, my breath catching as I saw the handwriting scrawled in faded ink across the label. James, listen alone. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My own name. Had I done this? Had I hidden this tape? My hands shook as I gripped it tighter. There was only one way to find out. I needed to listen. But as I turned to climb back up, I heard movement. Not from above, from behind me. The dirt shifted, and then something breathed. I froze. The dirt behind me shifted again. Something was moving. I didn't turn immediately. My body locked up, my mind racing through every possible explanation. An animal. A trick of my imagination, or something else. The breathing grew louder, slow, ragged. I clenched the cassette tape in my hand, forcing myself to turn. My phone's dim glow cast long shadows against the low crawlspace walls, flickering as my hand shook. The loose earth behind me was rising, like something was pushing up from beneath. I staggered back. My shoulders hit the wooden beam behind me, dust raining down as I struggled to breathe. My instincts screamed at me to run, climb, escape, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then the dirt split. Fingers, a hand burst through the soil. The skin was gray, stretched tight over the bones, as if whatever was beneath had been buried for a long, long time. The fingers flexed, soil crumbling from between them, and then it grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicked, fought. The grip tightened, unnaturally strong, nails digging into my skin. I scrambled backward, dragging my leg as the hand pulled me toward the loose earth. No, no, I flailed, my free hand finding a rock. Without thinking, I swung it down hard. Crack, the fingers jerked. Twitched, released. I didn't wait. I lunged for the ladder, scrambling up the rungs as fast as I could, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. I half expected another hand to snatch me from below, but I didn't stop. I burst into my bedroom, collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. Silence, no movement, no whispering, no hand, only the cassette tape, still clenched in my fist. I forced myself to stand, locking the crawlspace door behind me. My legs shook as I stumbled toward my desk. My old cassette player sat in the corner, half buried beneath papers and books. I shoved the tape inside. Click, the tape word. Static filled the speakers, crackling and distorted. Then, a voice, low, whispering, familiar, my voice, James. I stiffened. My own voice was on this tape. I had recorded this, but I didn't remember. The voice on the tape laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Then it whispered, "You should have left it buried." And then the phone rang. 2:14 a.m. I stared at the phone. 2:14 a.m. My wife's number, again. The cassette tape still whirred in the player, the static fading, replaced by my own voice. A voice I didn't remember recording. "You should have left it buried." I hesitated. My heart hammered in my chest. The phone kept ringing, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. I had a choice: answer the call, or listen to the rest of the tape. My hand hovered over the phone, but something deep inside me, something instinctual, told me to press play instead. So I did. Click. The tape hissed. Then my own voice spoke again, calm, slow, but wrong. "You think this is the first time, James." My stomach dropped. "How many times do you have to dig before you understand? How many times do you have to find the tape, answer the phone? How many times before you finally listen?" I shook my head. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The voice on the tape let out a soft chuckle. Check your arm. I glanced down. My skin prickled. My left arm, just above the wrist, a scar. Thin, faint, circular, like an incision. I didn't remember it being there. It's always there, James. My voice on the tape whispered. You just don't notice at first. Not until it starts over again. I reeled back. My head swam. What the hell was this? The phone was still ringing. 2:14 a.m. I hesitated for just a moment before finally picking up. I put the phone to my ear. Silence, then a whisper. James, don't listen to the tape. Her voice. My wife's voice, dead, gone, yet here. The static on the tape grew louder. The voice on the cassette laughed again, distorted and crackling. She always tells you that, doesn't she? But you never listen. You always press play, and then you end up here again. I clenched my fists. My breathing was ragged. Tears burned my eyes. James, my wife's voice pleaded, don't let it start over again. The cassette clicked. Stopped. The phone line cut. Silence. Then a knock at the bedroom door. I wasn't alone. Knock. My breath hitched. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt heavy, like something pressing against my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. The tape had stopped. The phone had gone silent, but something was at my bedroom door. I squeezed the phone in my trembling hand, my other palm slick with sweat. James, my wife's voice still echoed in my head. The last thing she had said, don't let it start over again. I turned toward the door. The brass knob gleamed in the dim glow of my bedside lamp. My pulse hammered in my ears. Another knock. This time softer, almost patient. I swallowed hard. I had two choices. Radio button open the door. Radio button ignore it. I took a step forward, my knees weak. The old wooden floor creaked beneath me. My fingers brushed against the knob. The moment my skin touched the metal, something whispered from the other side. James, please let me in. My stomach twisted. I knew that voice, but it wasn't my wife's. It was me. My own voice, desperate, pleading. I yanked my hand back like I'd been burned. My head swam. What was happening? Then the knob began to turn. No, 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 no. I hadn't touched it. I staggered back, my heart slamming against my ribs. My own reflection in the mirror across the room looked as terrified as I felt. The door creaked open, just a crack, and in the darkness beyond, a hand, pale, thin, slipping through. My hand, a perfect replica of my own, right down to the faint circular scar near the wrist. I froze. The fingers curled against the wood, and then the voice whispered again, so close it sent ice through my veins. Let me back in, James. I staggered back. My knees nearly buckled, and then the hand. My hand grabbed the edge of the door and shoved it open. I had 1 second to react, because standing in my doorway, bathed in the soft yellow glow of my bedside lamp, was me. Not a reflection, not a dream, a second James, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. You took too long, he said. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. The man standing in my doorway wasn't just a stranger. He was me. Same face, same height, same scar on the wrist, but his eyes, they were empty, hollow, like something wearing a human disguise but not quite getting it right. His lips curled into a slow, unsettling smile. You took too long, James. I stumbled backward, my legs almost giving out beneath me. My reflection in the mirror behind him was frozen in silent terror. What the hell? My voice cracked. Who are you? His head tilted, like he was amused, like I was the one who was out of place. I'm you, he said. The real you, the real me. I gripped the edge of my nightstand, and my heart slamming against my ribs. This had to be a nightmare, but then he took a step forward, and I smelled it. A faint, metallic scent. Like rusted iron, like blood. My stomach twisted. No, no, this isn't real. He let out a low chuckle. Too familiar. Oh, it's real, James. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's just been waiting. My hand shot toward my phone. Maybe if I called someone, but it was gone. The nightstand was empty, like I had never placed the phone there at all. I turned back to the doorway, my pulse pounding in my ears. He was closer, almost within reach, and now I could see it. His fingers twitching, nails too sharp, a flicker of something underneath his skin, something shifting, crawling. I opened my mouth to scream. But he moved first, faster than anything human. His hand shot forward, gripping my wrist. Cold, too cold. And suddenly my vision blurred, the room spun, and I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. Dark, endless, and all around me whispers, "You were never meant to leave. You should have answered sooner. Time to come home, James." I was falling. Not down, not up, just through. The world around me was dark but not empty. Shapes twisted in the void, flickering like dying embers. Whispers coiled around me. "You were never meant to leave. You should have answered sooner. Time to come home, James." I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt weightless, like I was floating between two places, two realities, and then I hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath out of me. Cold, damp earth pressed against my palms. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and something else, something rotting. I pushed myself up on shaky arms, my head pounding. The darkness around me was no longer empty. I was in a forest, but not the one I knew. The trees were tall, their trunks twisting in impossible ways. Their bark was dark, almost charred, and their branches stretched toward the sky like skeletal hands. There was no moon, no stars, just a thick, gray mist that slithered through the trees like it was alive. And then I saw him, the other me, standing a few feet away, watching, waiting, his head tilted, that same unsettling smile pulling at his lips. "You shouldn't have fought it, James," he said, stepping closer. I scrambled back, my hands sinking into the damp earth. "What the hell is this? Where am I?" He stopped just short of me. His eyes gleamed black, bottomless. "This is where you were supposed to be," he murmured, "where you belong." My pulse hammered. No, this wasn't right. "This is a dream," I muttered, shaking my head. "Just a nightmare." His smile widened, too wide. "Then why can't you wake up?" I swallowed hard. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to will myself awake, but nothing changed. I was still here. And then I heard my phone ring. Somewhere in the distance, a single, shrill tone cutting through the silence. I turned toward the sound, my heart leaping. My phone, away back, but the other me just laughed. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Try to reach it. See what happens." I didn't wait. I turned and ran. The ringing grew louder, clearer. My feet pounded against the earth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And then I saw it, a phone, my phone, lying in the dirt, screen glowing. I lunged for it, but just as my fingers grazed the screen, the ground vanished beneath me. And I was falling again. I was falling, again. The air rushed past me, cold and sharp like knives against my skin. My ears rang with the deafening roar of emptiness, and then I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my body as I landed on something hard and wet. My breath caught in my throat, my vision swam, dirt, gravel, the scent of rain, soaked pavement. I gasped, rolling onto my side. I knew this place, my street. I was back. Streetlights flickered overhead, their glow casting eerie, elongated shadows on the road. Everything was too quiet, and then my phone rang. I jerked upright, my pulse hammering in my ears. The screen glowed in the darkness, buzzing in my trembling hand. 2:14 a.m. And the caller ID unknown caller. For the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't hesitate. I answered, "Hello." The line crackled. Soft breathing, a moment of silence stretched between us, heavy and unnatural. Then James, her voice. My wife's voice. The world spun. My throat tightened. "Ava," I whispered, "is it really you?" Another breath. The sound of wind rustling through the receiver. "Why did you answer?" She whispered. Goosebumps prickled my skin. I needed to talk to you. James, you weren't supposed to pick up." I froze, The air around me seemed to shift, growing heavier, pressing against my chest. My breath came in shallow gasps. Ava, what are you talking about? The wind intensified. The static in the call deepened, like 1,000 voices whispering beneath the surface. They know now, James. A sharp ringing filled my ears. The streetlights flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to move. And then I heard its footsteps, approaching from behind me, slow, deliberate. I spun around, phone clutched tight in my hand. The street was empty, but the footsteps didn't stop. They grew closer, heavier, and then a voice, low, distorted, you shouldn't have answered. The call cut to silence, and before I could move, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The streetlights had died, leaving me in absolute darkness. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The silence was too heavy, pressing against my chest like an unseen weight. And then the footsteps started again. Slow, measured, closer. I spun around, my phone's dim screen the only source of light. Nothing, but I wasn't alone. The air was thick, charged, as if something unseen was watching me, waiting. Ava. My voice barely made it past my lips. No answer, but the static on my phone buzzed to life. A whisper, faint, garbled, you need to run. The words hit me like a punch. My pulse pounded in my ears, and then a shadow moved, not just a flicker, not a trick of my eyes. Something shifted in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my phone's glow. Something huge, the shape of a man, but wrong, too tall, too still. Then it stepped forward. My legs refused to move. My body screamed to run, but I was rooted in place. The thing took another step, closer now, the outline sharper. Limbs too long, neck tilted at an unnatural angle, and then I saw its face. It was mine, a hollow, distorted version of me. Its mouth stretched in a grin that was too wide, teeth sharp like broken glass. And then it whispered, James, let me in. My stomach dropped. My grip tightened on my phone, and then it moved, fast. I turned and ran. I ran. The pavement blurred beneath me as my feet pounded against the wet asphalt. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, the footsteps followed. But they weren't normal. They didn't match mine. They were deliberate, slower, almost playful, like it knew I had nowhere to go. My phone's screen was the only light, but it was flickering, glitching. The call with Ava was still open, but all I could hear was static. And beneath it, a voice, not hers. You can't run from yourself, James. I choked on a breath, forcing my legs to move faster. But the street, it wasn't ending. No matter how far I ran, I kept passing the same flickering streetlight, the same abandoned car, the same old mailbox. I was trapped, a loop, a nightmare with no exit. I skidded to a stop, my breath fogging in the cold air. The world around me felt off, too quiet, and then I heard it, a low chuckle, not behind me, ahead. I lifted my phone, and my own face stared back at me. Standing beneath the flickering streetlight, the thing that wore my face grinned. But this time its eyes weren't empty. They were glowing, cold, hungry. James, it whispered, it's time to wake up. The ground beneath me shook. The air turned thick, like I was drowning in something invisible. And my phone screen, it flashed. Incoming call, unknown. I stared at it, my hands trembling. I knew I shouldn't answer. But before I could stop myself, my thumb moved. And I picked up. I shouldn't have answered, but my thumb moved on its own. The moment I pressed accept, the world around me seemed to crack. The air turned thick, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The flickering streetlight buzzed louder, distorting, bending, like reality itself was glitching. And then the voice came through, James, why do you keep running? It wasn't mine. It wasn't Ava's. It was something else, something ancient, something that knew me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat felt paralyzed, as if speaking would invite something in. The thing standing under the streetlight, the thing wearing my face, tilted its head. Its mouth moved, but I heard the words through the phone instead. "You're so close, James. Just wake up. Let me in." The voice echoed inside my skull, burrowing deep. I staggered back, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers went numb. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, "This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare." But when I opened them, the thing was right in front of me. Face to face, smiling, the world around me blurred, bending like a heat mirage. The street, the sky, the air itself. It all seemed to vibrate. And then the phone screen changed, a countdown, 00, 0500, 0400, 03. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What happens when it hits 0? I whispered. The thing grinned wider. 00, 02, the voice on the line whispered. "You find out the truth." 00, 01, and then the screen flickered to black. And I fell. I hit the ground hard, but it wasn't pavement beneath me anymore. It was carpet, soft, familiar. My heart pounded as I sat up, blinking against the dim glow of a bedside lamp. My mind reeled, trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't on the street anymore. I was in my bedroom. I looked around, my breath uneven. Everything looked normal. My nightstand, my dresser, the curtains swaying slightly from the ceiling fan, but something felt off. Like the air itself was wrong, too still. My phone was still clutched in my hand. The screen was black, but the moment I touched it, it lit up. And a single message appeared. "Did you think you escaped?" I swallowed hard. My thumb trembled as I scrolled down. "Look outside." A cold chill slid down my spine. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The curtains fluttered lightly, the soft rustle filling the silence. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady, and moved toward it. With every step, my stomach twisted tighter, my instincts screaming at me to stop. I reached out, gripped the fabric, and pulled it aside. Darkness, not the usual night sky, no streetlights, no city glow, no moon, just emptiness. And then, in the reflection of the window, something moved behind me. A shape, tall, watching. I spun around. Nothing was there. But the closet door, it was open now. It hadn't been before. My pulse thundered as I stared at the black gap between the doors. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. And then a whisper, "James," not from the phone, not from outside, from the closet. I took a shaky step back, every muscle in my body screaming to run, and then the door creaked wider, revealing something standing inside, something that looked just like me, smiling, and it whispered, "Go back to sleep." My breath hitched. The thing in the closet, it was me, same face, same clothes, but its eyes, they weren't right. They were too deep, too dark, like they didn't end. A slow, eerie smile crept across its face. "Go back to sleep, James." Its voice slithered through the air, thick and unnatural, like it was layered with something else, something hollow. I took a step back. My entire body screamed Aruen, but my feet wouldn't move. "You don't belong here," it whispered. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The smile didn't falter, didn't blink. Then, in a voice identical to mine, it said, "I'm you, the real you." No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. I glanced at my phone, still clutched in my hand. The screen was dark, but I could feel something shifting inside it, a vibration, deep and unnatural. And then, without warning, the phone rang. My heart lurched. I stared at the screen. Unknown caller, no, her. I hesitated. The thing in the closet tilted its head, its grin widening. Like it was waiting. The ringing grew louder. I swallowed, my throat dry as sand. My thumb hovered over the screen. If I answered, would I be letting her in? Would I be letting him in? The ringing stopped. Silence. And then the phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, a message. I blinked. My hand shook as I unlocked the screen. "Don't look at him. Don't turn your back on him. But whatever you do, don't let him smile again." What? My pulse pounded in my ears. I slowly lifted my gaze back to the closet. The thing was closer now. Not inside the closet anymore. Standing in my room, and it was smiling, but not like before. Not just eerie, not just wrong. Too wide. Too sharp. A cold, inhuman grin, stretching beyond the limits of skin. The light in the room flickered. A deep, guttural clicking sound filled the air. The walls shuddered. The ceiling groaned. And in that moment, I understood this thing wasn't just pretending to be me. It was something else entirely. Something that wanted to take my place. And I had just made a mistake. I had let it smile. I couldn't move. The thing that wore my face took another slow step forward. Its grin stretched wider, too far for human skin. A deep clicking sound rattled from its throat, like something breaking apart, or something putting itself back together. I backed away, my heel hitting the edge of my bed. My chest heaved, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My phone vibrated again. Another message, run. The light flickered. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. The thing lunged. I threw myself sideways, crashing into my nightstand. The lamp toppled, shattering against the floor. Darkness swallowed the room. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. The closet door slammed shut behind me. But I knew it wasn't inside anymore. It was here, somewhere in the dark. I bolted through the doorway, down the hall. The air felt heavier with every step. The house wasn't right. The walls seemed too close together, the ceiling too low. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, bending at impossible angles. I wasn't in my home anymore. I wasn't anywhere. The thing's voice slithered through the dark. You can't run, James. My vision blurred. I reached the stairs, gripping the banister for balance. A shadow flickered at the bottom. Not mine. His, a jagged silhouette, wet with limbs too long, too thin, standing at the foot of the stairs, waiting. I spun toward the front door, locked, deadbolt jammed. The house wouldn't let me leave. The thing laughed. A sick, rattling sound. You were never meant to leave. My phone vibrated again. Another message, the attic. My pulse pounded. I looked up. The attic hatch was slightly open. A thin sliver of darkness between the wooden frame. No way in hell was I going up there. But the thing moved, a blur of black, skittering up the walls. No more time. I ran, straight for the attic. I leaped, grabbing the ladder, pulling myself up. My muscles screamed, my body trembling. I didn't look down. The thing was right behind me. The moment I reached the attic floor, I kicked the ladder away. The wooden frame slammed shut. Silence, darkness, then a whisper from below. You're getting closer, James. Closer to what? I turned and froze, because there, in the middle of the attic floor, was a single object, a phone. Ringing, I swallowed hard. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. The name flashing on the caller, ID'd James. My own name. I reached for it, my fingers shaking. The second I touched it, the attic collapsed, and everything went black. The attic was gone, but I was still falling. Air rushed past me, cold and suffocating. My body twisted in the void, but there was no ground, no end, just an endless drop. Then a snap. I hit something solid, not the floor of my attic, not my house, somewhere else. My lungs burned as I pushed myself upright. The world around me was wrong. A dim, flickering glow surrounded me, like candlelight, but shifting, like it was alive. Shadows twisted in ways they shouldn't, stretching across the walls like long, grasping fingers. I wasn't in my home. I wasn't anywhere familiar. My hand was still clenched around the phone. Its screen pulsed faintly, casting a blue glow over my fingers. The name on the screen hadn't changed. James, my own name. The call was still ringing. My heart pounded. I shouldn't answer. Every part of my mind screamed don't answer, but my thumb moved on its own. I pressed accept. And the moment I did, I heard my own voice. James, listen to me. The voice on the other end was mine, but it sounded off, ragged, desperate. You don't have time. You have to wake up. I swallowed hard. What the hell is this? Who are you? You don't understand. The voice shook. My voice, me. You never should have answered her first call. A chill wrapped around my spine. My wife. A horrible silence. Then, that wasn't her, James. The line crackled. It was never her. I staggered back. The shadows around me moved. A breath against my ear. James, not from the phone, from behind me. The voice I had longed to hear for months. Soft, familiar, wrong. I turned and saw her, standing in the shifting dark, eyes too deep, skin too pale. A smile that wasn't quite right. You don't need to listen to him, love. The shadows closed in, and the call went dead. She was smiling, my wife, my dead wife, but it wasn't her. The thing standing before me had her face, her voice, her warmth. But something in my gut knew it wasn't real. Still, I wanted to believe. I wanted to run into her arms and never let go. James, darling. Her voice was silk. You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The phone in my hand vibrated violently. Another call. I looked down. James, my own name. Again. The call from me. The thing wearing my wife's face tilted its head. You don't need that, love. My grip tightened around the phone. I shouldn't answer. I should run. I should, but I couldn't stop myself. My thumb hit accept. A rush of static burst through the speaker. Then, James, listen. My own voice, frantic, panicked. She's not real. She never was. A cold hand touched my cheek. I jumped, my head snapping up. She was so close. Her eyes, dark and hollow, bore into mine. Who are you talking to, James? The voice on the phone grew desperate. Don't let her touch you. Too late. A sharp, searing pain shot through my skull. I screamed, clutching my head. My vision blurred, the world tilting. She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear. You were never supposed to remember. Then, in a blink, I was somewhere else. I gasped, my hands clutching at damp earth, cold air, the scent of soil and rot. I wasn't in my house. I wasn't in the attic. I was outside, standing in front of a grave, a single headstone. The name carved into it made my blood run cold. James Holloway, loving husband, forever missed my name, my grave, and just behind me, in the darkness, I heard her voice. Welcome home, my love. I stared at the headstone, my headstone. The letters were carved deep into the cold stone, mocking me. James Holloway, loving husband, forever missed. No, this couldn't be real. I reached out, running trembling fingers over the surface. The stone was wet with morning dew, rough and unyielding under my touch. This wasn't a dream. I was dead. But I wasn't. A sharp laugh cut through the silence. I turned. She was there, my wife, standing just beyond the grave, her long, dark hair swaying in the wind, eyes locked onto mine. James, she whispered. Her voice was soft, too soft. Why do you keep fighting this? Fighting what? I stumbled back, my breath coming fast and shallow. My mind was a storm, memories flashing like lightning. My house, the phone calls, the thing wearing my wife's face, nothing made sense. I looked around. The cemetery stretched out into the darkness, row upon row of graves. Then I saw them. More headstones, not just mine. I stepped closer. My pulse hammered in my ears. The first name I read sent ice through my veins. Olivia Holloway, beloved wife, never forgotten my wife's name. But she died 6 months ago. How was she here? I turned back to her, my vision swimming. She was smiling. We belong together, James. I shook my head. No, this wasn't real. Something was wrong. I don't understand. My voice cracked. Why is your name here? Her smile widened. Because, darling, she whispered, you buried me yourself. The world tilted. The breath caught in my throat. No, it wasn't true. It couldn't be true. I staggered back, my head spinning. My wife had died in a car accident. I wasn't even with her that night. I got the call from the hospital. A sharp pain shot through my skull. Memories flooded in, crashing over me like a tidal wave. A dark road, headlights, the rain, blood on my hands. Her blood, my breath hitched. I didn't just lose her, I killed her, and now she was calling me home. I was shaking. No, I was crumbling. Everything, the phone calls, the whispers, the shadow at my door. It all made sense now. The grave beneath my feet, the blood in my memories. I killed her. I killed my wife. No. My voice was barely a whisper. No, this isn't real. But Olivia, or whatever she was now, only smiled. "You remember now, don't you, James?" I took a step back, but the earth beneath me felt soft, sinking, swallowing. Grave dirt. The cemetery stretched around me in endless, impossible rows. The air smelled of rain and decay, the moon hanging too low, too bright. I was trapped. I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't mean to. My throat clenched. The words felt wrong. Because some part of me, deep in the place I'd locked away, knew the truth. That night wasn't an accident. The headlights, the scream, the impact, her body on the pavement, rain pooling like blood around her. And then I ran. I left her there. I buried the truth just like I buried her. And now she was here. She was waiting. "It's time, James." Her voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was sad. A final whisper on the wind. I felt something cold brush my fingers. A phone. I looked down. It was my phone. The screen was cracked, the numbers flickering. 2:14 a.m. The call was coming from my number. I stared at it. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what would happen if I answered. I knew what she wanted, but maybe I deserved it. The ringing grew louder. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I closed my eyes. I pressed accept. Silence. A cold wind rushed through the cemetery. Then her voice. "I forgive you." The ground collapsed beneath me. I woke up in bed. The room was silent. No ringing phone. No whispers in the dark. For the first time in months, I was alone. I sat up, my breath unsteady. The weight in my chest was still there, but something was different. Lighter, I reached for my phone. The screen was normal. No missed calls. Had it all been a nightmare? Or had she finally let me go? Outside, the first hints of dawn crept through my window. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in 6 months, I slept. For the first time in 6 months, I slept. But it didn't feel right. When I woke up, the silence was deafening. I sat up in bed, my body heavy, my breath slow. No ringing phone. No whispers, no flickering shadows in the corners of my vision. Olivia was gone. The weight in my chest had lifted, but somehow it felt wrong. Like something was missing, like something had been taken. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen. It was blank. No missed calls, no voicemails, no timestamps mocking me with 2:14 a.m. It was as if it had never happened. As if she had never existed. 11:23 a.m. The morning light streamed through my window, almost blinding after months of living in the shadow of my own fears. I moved through my apartment slowly, my limbs stiff, my mind hazy. Everything looked normal. My kitchen, my living room, the pictures on my walls, but something gnawed at me, a whisper in the back of my mind. I walked to the hallway mirror and stopped. My reflection stared back. Something was off. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. My skin looked pale, too pale. My eyes, were they always this dark? I lifted my hand to touch my face, and for a split second, my reflection didn't move. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The mirror stood still. My face was normal. I was just imagining things. Right, 2:14 p.m. A sound startled me from my thoughts. A vibration. My phone. I grabbed it, my stomach twisting into knots. But it wasn't a call. It was a message. Unknown number. Do you remember now? My fingers shook as I typed a response. Who is this? No reply. The room felt colder, the silence heavier, and then I noticed something. The picture on my nightstand. It had always been there. A photo of Olivia and me on our wedding day, smiling, her hand in mine. But now, I was alone in the picture. No Olivia, no one beside me, just an empty space where she should have been. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone again, opening my photo gallery. Every picture of us gone, every trace of her erased, as if she had never existed, as if she had never been real. But she was. I knew she was. I had heard her voice. I had felt her presence. I had lived in her haunting. But now the world was acting like she had never been there at all, like she was nothing more than a bad dream. And the worst part, Somewhere deep inside, a thought slithered into my mind. A horrible, impossible thought. What if I was wrong? What if Olivia never existed? I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The message on the screen burned into my brain. Do you remember now? The silence in my apartment felt wrong. Too empty. For months, Olivia's voice had haunted me, her whispers curling through the air like smoke. Now, there was nothing. No missed calls, no voicemails, no proof. I scrolled through my phone, flipping through my contacts, my photos, my call logs. Every trace of Olivia was gone. It was as if she had been erased, or worse, as if she had never existed. 3:00 p.m. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen. I had one choice. I needed proof. I opened my email and searched for Olivia's name. Nothing, no emails, no old conversations, no anniversary reminders. My heart pounded. I checked my bank statements, looking for anything gifts I had bought her, dinners we had shared, even the damn mortgage. Nothing, no shared expenses, no record of her ever living here. I tried social media next. My fingers trembled as I clicked on my Facebook profile. The albums, the ones I knew held years of memories, were still there, but Olivia wasn't. Every picture had been altered. Birthdays, holidays, vacations. The spaces where she should have been were empty, as if she had never stood beside me, as if she had never existed. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. Someone had done this. Someone had erased her, and they wanted me to forget. 3:30 p.m. I grabbed my jacket and keys, shoving my phone into my pocket. If the digital world had been rewritten, I needed something physical. I tore through my apartment, flipping through old boxes, searching for anything. A letter, a receipt, a note in her handwriting, but every file, every scrap of paper, it was all mine. I stopped in front of my nightstand, my hands shaking. One last thing. I pulled open the drawer and grabbed my wedding ring. It was still there, the cool metal pressed into my palm as I held it up, staring at the band. It was real. She was real. I wasn't losing my mind. I slid the ring onto my finger, exhaling a shaky breath, and then the doorbell rang. 3:33 p.m. I froze. No one ever visited me, not anymore. I took slow, careful steps toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. Through the peephole, I saw nothing, just the dimly lit hallway outside. Another knock. Louder this time. I swallowed hard and reached for the handle. I hesitated for a moment, then I pulled the door open. A small package sat on the welcome mat. No delivery label, no name. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it inside, shutting the door behind me, my breath shallow. I set it on the kitchen table and slowly peeled away the brown paper. Inside, there was only one thing. A cassette tape, no markings, no labels, just a single, old-fashioned cassette. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its worn surface. And then, in the silence of my apartment, my phone rang. 2:14 a.m. Olivia's number, 2:14 a.m. The phone vibrated in my hand, Olivia's name glowing on the screen. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. She had been erased from my life, every trace of her gone. No photos, no emails, no proof, and yet, here she was, calling me. My hands shook as I pressed answer. James. Her voice was a whisper, thick with static, like she was speaking through a storm. My stomach twisted. Olivia, I choked out. You found it, she whispered. I looked down at the cassette tape resting on my kitchen table. What is this? I asked, my voice barely audible. Don't. Her voice crackled, breaking apart. Don't. Listen. The line went dead. The call vanished from my history, just like every other one before it. I dropped the phone onto the table, staring at the cassette. She didn't want me to listen, but that only made me want to more. 2:30 a.m. The cassette player. I didn't own a cassette player. No one did anymore, but my neighbor, Mr. Harris, was an old collector. He had a shelf full of vintage recorders and tapes. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding. After a long moment, I heard the sound of shuffling, then the door cracked open. Mr. Harris squinted at me. "James, what the hell are you doing up this late?" I need to borrow a cassette player." He blinked, clearly confused. "A cassette player? For what?" I hesitated. "It's personal." He sighed, then disappeared inside. A minute later, he returned and handed me a small, black recorder. "Be careful with it," he muttered. "That thing's older than you are." I nodded, clutching it tightly. "Thanks, Mr. Harris." As I turned to leave, he called out, "Hey, James." I paused. "You look like hell," he said. "You should get some sleep." I forced a weak smile. "Yeah, I'll try." I hurried back to my apartment, locked the door, and placed the recorder on the table. I stared at the tape for a long time. Then, finally, I pressed play. 2:45 a.m., the recording, a burst of static filled the room. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking on hardwood. A chair creaked. Someone sat down, and then a voice. "James, if you're hearing this, it's already too late." My stomach clenched. The voice was familiar. It was mine. The tape crackled. "I don't have much time." The recording continued. "They've already started erasing me, erasing her, but you have to remember, you have to keep listening. No matter what happens, don't stop, and whatever you do, don't trust them." The sound of knocking echoed through the speakers. A knock on a door, my blood turned to ice. The knocking wasn't just on the tape, it was real. Someone was at my front door, right now. 2:45 a.m. The knock at the door, the knocking was steady. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I stared at the front door, my breath caught in my throat. The cassette tape was still playing, my own voice crackling through the tiny speaker. "James, if you're hearing this, it's already too late." The knock came again, louder. I swallowed hard. Whoever was on the other side, they weren't leaving. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. Then I stopped. A whisper slid through the crack under the door. "Don't." My heart pounded. It was Olivia's voice. I staggered back. This wasn't possible. She was gone, erased from my life, wasn't she? The whisper came again. "James, please don't open it." But outside, whoever was knocking was waiting for me to make a choice. 2:47 a.m. The choice. I grabbed my phone, flipping to the peephole camera. My stomach twisted. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the knocking continued. I held my breath and slowly reached for the knob again. If Olivia was warning me not to open it, maybe I should listen. But then a voice from the other side. Low, familiar, mine. "James, I know you're in there. Let me in." I nearly dropped the phone. The person outside wasn't just knocking. They were me, too. 50 a.m. The impossible. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Was I losing it? Had I finally gone insane? No, this was real, and I had 2 choices. 1. Open the door and face whatever was waiting for me. 2. Walk away and never know the truth. The cassette recorder crackled again. "Whatever you do, don't trust them." I clenched my jaw. I had to know. I reached out, gripped the handle, and turned it. The door swung open, and I saw myself staring back at me. A perfect copy. Same clothes, same eyes, same everything. Except his skin was just a little too pale. His smile was just a little too wide, and when he spoke, his voice echoed. "You should have listened." Then everything went black. 2:50 a.m. The echo of my own voice. I stared at the person standing in my doorway. He looked exactly like me. Same face, same hair, same tired eyes, but something was wrong. His smile was too wide, his skin too pale, almost lifeless. And his voice. "You should have listened." A deep, unnatural echo distorted my own words. I stumbled back, heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. 2:52 a.m. The uninvited guest, the thing that looked like me, took a step forward. Its eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "Who are you?" I forced the words out, my throat dry. It didn't answer. It just smiled, then. It stepped inside. I tried to move to slam the door shut, but my body wouldn't obey. A chill ran through me as the air grew heavy, pressing down like an invisible weight. I wasn't in control anymore, and I knew deep down that I had just made a terrible mistake. 2:55 a.m., the whispering shadows the room darkened. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting toward me like grasping fingers. The thing, that imposter, stood in the middle of my living room, watching me. It cocked its head, studying me like I was a specimen in a jar. Then it whispered in my voice, "Do you know why she called you every night?" My breath caught. "Do you know what she was trying to tell you?" I clenched my fists. "Where is she?" I demanded. The imposter's grin widened. "She never left." The shadows swirled around me, voices whispering from the darkness, and then, from behind me, a familiar voice. "James." I spun around. Olivia was standing there, pale, hollow-eyed, a ghost of the woman I had lost. She reached for me, her expression filled with something I couldn't quite read. Was it sorrow, or was it a warning? The imposter behind me laughed softly. "She tried to save you, but you never listened." The darkness surged forward, and then everything went black. 3:00 a.m., the last ring, a deafening silence filled the darkness. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, but I could feel them. The imposter, the shadows, Olivia, they were all around me, their presence thick in the air, pressing in like the weight of the ocean. Then a sound, ring-ing, my phone, it was ringing, the same call at the same time, 2:14 a.m. Even though I knew, it was already past 3:01 a.m. The answer. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling. I didn't want to answer, but I had to. I pressed the screen. "Hello." Silence. Then, Olivia's voice. "James, you don't have much time." My heart pounded. What is happening to me? I whispered. The shadows moved, twisting, shifting. The imposter still stood there, watching, smiling. "They've already taken too much," Olivia said, "but you can still escape." "How?" I begged. "Tell me what to do." The imposter took a step forward. The air turned frigid. The call crackled. And then, Olivia said the last thing I ever expected. "James, wake up." 3:03 a.m. Reality shattered. Wake up. What did she mean? I looked around. The walls were warping, melting like wax. The imposter's face. My own face began to distort. "This isn't real," Olivia whispered. "It never was." The imposter lunged. I screamed, and then everything snapped. The truth. I gasped for air, my body jerking upright. I was in bed. Daylight poured through the window. Birds chirped outside. I whipped my head around. My room. My real, familiar room. Had it been a dream? My phone buzzed beside me. I grabbed it, my hands still shaking. 2:13 a.m. A call was coming in. My heart nearly stopped. Olivia's number. I hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, I answered. "James." The line crackled. "Don't go back to sleep." Click. The call ended, and I never slept again.